Hi there and welcome to our first webinar, Charting Your Career in Built Environment Sustainability. My name is Arman Sarkisian. I am the founder of Sustainavate and I have been operating in the built environment field for almost 20 years now. The purpose of this webinar is to introduce you to some of the key roles and positions when it comes to built environment sustainability and enable you to chart your career path to the area of interest. Whether you are already working in a position and would like to branch out into a field of sustainability relevant to your position, this is quite common with facility managers and asset managers who would like to improve their skills in this field and manage their facilities more sustainably. And this webinar is also applicable to entrants of this field, as whether a university graduate or someone contemplating their future career. In this webinar, we will have an introduction to key concepts when it comes to sustainability roles and job titles. Then we will zoom in to some of the sustainability functions and roles within those job titles relevant to the built environment space. Then we will zoom out and categorize those many functions and roles into three key distinct areas that are more unique in terms of our personal aptitude to what we would like our jobs to look like. Following that, we will spend some time on the concept of generalist versus specialist, which is quite important to note when it comes in the sustainability field, especially built environment sustainability, where being a generalist or a specialist can actually dictate which function or role and position that you can contribute to. Towards the end of this webinar, we will touch on some of the career advancement pathways in terms of certification, training, communities, and networks that you might want to consider to support your next career move. So let's get started. Examples of sustainability roles and job titles. When it comes to sustainability roles and job titles, this is quite a diverse field. To give you an example, I just jumped into LinkedIn yesterday and looked at a number of advertised positions and roles just to make sure I capture a diverse sample of what's out there, as you can see in this screen. We have requirements these days for sustainability consultants, which are individuals either work for their own organization or work as consultants supporting other organizations in achieving their sustainability goals. There are jobs under the title of Sustainability Coordinator and Manager, which is quite a confusing title these days because this title could mean two different things in two different environments within the same country. So, for example, a sustainability coordinator in a real estate or a facility management firm could mean an entry-level position, someone who handles sustainability data and reports on those, while in a local government area and council environment, that's actually quite a senior role, almost more senior than a team leader role. So the titles can trick you a little bit out there. And there are other titles out there like renewable energy specialist, corporate social responsibility specialist, environmental scientist, which is also a confusing title because could be something relevant to sustainability, but also could be relevant to another discipline like contaminated land assessment and land management aspect of things. There are also some job titles these days that request energy auditors, sustainable supply chain manager, which is procurement relevant, green building professional, which is rating system relevant to assess buildings, environmental policy analyst, climate change analyst, sustainability educator trainer like ourselves, water resource specialists, waste management specialists, sustainable product designers, and more senior roles like Chief Sustainability Officer, Chief Decarbonization Officer, and there are also technical roles like neighbors, CBD assessor, and Green Star assessor. This list by no means exhaustive of all the sustainability roles and titles out there, but just here to give you a sense of what's out there when you're looking under the sustainability banner while researching for roles and positions. There are also numerous job descriptions out there that could combine one or two of these or some of these under a job description. So the intent here is to give you a sense of what the industry could ask for, and comes back to us later on to ask for a position description or description of the role to understand what it entails in terms of the tasks and activities that falls under that role, which we will explore next. This is a little bit of a comic relief because sometimes it feels out there that when organizations request a person that have sustainability job description in their title, somehow it's that job description could entail everything that the light touches. This is a quote from The Lion King, if you've watched that. And unfortunately, it holds true in some roles I've seen in the past. This slide from a different masterclass that we teach, our masterclass 1, and it's quite important just to spend a couple of minutes on it because many of the roles and titles that you would see in the built environment sustainability field will, one way or another, link to those stakeholders who operate in the built environment. And those stakeholders are the occupiers, the tenants, facility managers, which represent the occupiers, asset managers, which represent the owners, maintenance trades, project managers, and the sustainability and ESG teams. I won't expand a lot on these because we've got almost a module under that masterclass that talks in detail about those stakeholders, but I just wanted to highlight the importance of making yourself aware of these positions and titles, because one way or another, when you're looking for a career in sustainability, you will interact with these stakeholders. Now, key sustainability functions and roles in the built environment. When we look at built environment, and I'll highlight what that means, we look at key functions and roles that you as a sustainability professional or a professional operating in the built environment and branching out to sustainability will be undertaking one way or another. And the aggregation or combination of these would align to your role and position description or be close to your role and position description. So you don't necessarily need to know all of these or do all of these, but being aware of that, now we're zooming into this, it's important for later on when we zoom out and start categorizing this, for you to understand where your role might fall. So first, built environment. When we mention the term built environment, we refer to buildings. And buildings have classes, and we expand on these classes in our first masterclass. And when we talk about Building Code of Australia and the various building types from commercial offices, shopping centers, manufacturing facilities, etc. The common roles for a sustainability professional, and I'm going to use the term sustainability professional regardless whether you're already a professional looking to branch out to sustainability or someone trying to enter the field of sustainability. There is the energy, water, and waste data capture roles, which are roles relevant to most organizations to have someone responsible or have the accountability to organize the capture of all the energy, water, and waste data, and the analysis and reporting on these data to align with certain benchmarks and metric relevant to that organization. Whether you're reporting on emissions and whether you're reporting on benchmarking data to compare with peers, that's what the role really entails. There is the data analytics and visualizations, which is a step up from the previous role for someone or a platform that captures that data and visualize it into something more meaningful for others and the stakeholders to understand. There is performance tracking, which captures potentially the first two roles, but takes it a step further to track the performance against strategic targets. There is the role of measurement and verification, whether from a data capture perspective to compare it to a baseline data, or whether from an execution perspective to measure and verify certain things you would have implemented in a facility to see whether they achieve the benefits it has promised or not. And there is carbon accounting, which is a field that has its own standards that govern that, but also links one way or another to the data capture. And there are also hands-on roles like energy, water, and waste assessments or audits, where you have feet on the ground responsible for identifying and scoping opportunities to achieve energy, water, and waste reduction across facilities. And there is also the field of building ratings for professionals who are more interested in assessing and rating buildings' performance using a rating tool like LEED, Green Star, NABERS, which is the National Australian Built Environment Rating System tool, and so forth. There is detailed feasibility studies for professionals who might take the assessments and audit step further and create feasibility studies, and there is an entire art that revolves around that we capture elements of it in our first masterclass, but that role requires a bit of a more insight into the strategic objectives of your stakeholders and how you would align data coming from an assessment and visualizing it and capturing it and presenting it in a way that's appealing to those stakeholders. There are other fields also that relate to sustainability, like asset lifecycle cost analysis. Then we look at energy management, water management, and waste management plans. And there are more human side of it relevant to behavioral change programs and stakeholders engagement. So again, by no means this is a list of comprehensive sustainability functions and roles. That's just to give you some of the most common ones that in the previous job descriptions, organization ask for either one or two or a combination of these under those descriptions. Now, we will zoom out a little bit to look at the categorizations of the key roles in the built environment. If you look at all the previous positions we've mentioned earlier, you can potentially categorize them all into three distinct categories. The first one is sustainability data management and insight. The second one is scoping, and the third one is strategy. In a way, there would be a category that only looks after the data capture, analytics, visualization, and presentation of data. It's basically data-focused roles, whether it's gathering, analyzing, reporting, and relevant to performance and sustainability metrics, and sometimes building ratings fall under that category. And there is a second category that is more concerned in using some of this data to plan and be on the ground to identify opportunities or goals and implement those opportunities and goals. Basically, executing sustainability measures in built environments. And rating and assessments, the actual undertaking of rating and assessment could fall under this, while the reporting of the outcomes of the ratings and assessment could fall under the first category. So there is a way of how you capture and position those. And the last aspect is where you would see in large portfolios, and sometimes even at a building level, is the strategy. Is having the strategy that utilizes insights from the first group and utilizes some outcomes from the first group to plan and design the strategy of your building and portfolio to future-proof your assets. And this is where most of the senior roles could fall in, like Chief Sustainability Officer, Chief Decarbonization Officer. They all fall under this category. This by no means to say one category is better than the other, and also by no means to say that one category will earn more money than others, in case some of you are interested on the monetary aspect of it to understand the differences. It's really there to capture some of the characteristics of these roles that might align with our personal aptitude to how we would look at a role that suits us best in the future. And to give you an example, in my own career, when I first started, I am an electrical engineer by education. That meant I was more attracted to a role in building services. Then I branched out into sustainability, doing a data role, which was quite interesting for me to understand what the data can be used for. And later on, I was more interested to be on the ground, visiting a large number of facilities, various types of facilities, and learn how to identify measures and implement those measures. And after doing this for a number of years, I've acquired enough knowledge now to look at it from a strategic perspective and start planning portfolio strategies and building teams and capabilities to deliver those outcomes. So again, I'm using this example to say that by no means is limiting to any of you should you wish to expand to all of the three. None of these categories should limit you in your thinking for a future role in sustainability, but they are just there to guide you through the thought process that some of the functions and tasks that you would like to undertake as part of your future sustainability role might fall into one of these categories and might impact your thought process on how you would approach them. There is, however, some differences in terms of the educational requirements and the experience requirements that allows you to move from one category to another, where the first two categories potentially are easier to acquire and understand from a qualification perspective and training perspective, while the third category might require some experience in the field for a number of years to achieve that outcome. Now, while we're in the zoom out mode looking at the categories, another concept that will help us in refining that thought process in charting your career path is the concept of a specialist versus generalist. So while the definition here states that a specialist focuses deeply on a specific area within their field, while a generalist has a broad understanding of multiple areas, that difference can sometimes overlap when you look at it from the perspective of certain roles, and I'm going to expand on this. So, to look at the first category, which is relevant to data capture, analysis, and visualization, you will have to predominantly be a specialist in that. That means You need to understand the data from the perspective of how you handle the data, how you manipulate the data, how you visualize it. Doesn't mean you need to be an IT specialist, because there are also different specializations to that. Some of them are technical, some of them are not really relevant to the understanding of the data, but you are a data specialist when you look at it from that perspective. But if you were a generalist and say you are a chief decarbonization officer, you would need to know enough about that data process, but not necessarily need to know all the details and ins and outs of the interpolation, extrapolation, and how the data is stored and which software package to use to visualize it. You're more interested on the outcome of that data and how it will align or present it to your organizational KPIs, key performance indicators. But if you are, say, an energy auditor on the execution side of things, the second category, many might confuse that role and think you are a specialist because you are an energy auditor. But energy auditors are actually not a specialist, they are generalists. They are specialists in the audit process. So when you attend a facility, you capture the information based on a process. But when it comes to the knowledge required, you need to be generalist. You need to know a little bit about everything to deliver that process. Basically, you need to know enough about mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, hydraulics, heat recovery, renewables, just to name few. So when you conduct your audit process, you're able to follow that process and capture relevant information that will help in the audit process. However, there's also a common industry term called the audit team, where you should have a back of house team that are specialists in each of these areas that can expand on the knowledge if needed, or your recommendations if needed, to give better outcomes to your clients. So the reason I'm mentioning all these examples, and I'm going to mention a couple more in a second, is just to guide your thought process first to define yourself. Are you a specialist? Are you very technical and would like to only capture one area and specialize in it? Or are you a generalist? Because when you look at the three categories that we mentioned earlier, data related, execution related, and strategy related, the strategy aspect of things is predominantly generalist. They might come from a specialist background, but you need to have that generalist view to look at the big picture, to understand certain things about certain fields, but keep your focus on the big picture. While the data aspect of it, you might have the specialist and you might have a generalist of it. Then you might be able to pick elements of it that will fit best to your aptitude. Same thing to the second category when it comes to the execution. The specialist part of executions are the ones who specialize in a certain area, whether someone who does only lighting projects or mechanical projects, depends on their educational backgrounds, or someone who only qualified in doing building ratings and execute ratings. While a generalist in the field could be someone who looks at the feasibility studies and capturing all this information and preparing it for the strategy phase of the process. This is why we mention those, to give you a sense of what's required. Just while we're at this, another example to look at is building ratings and building benchmarking. So many professionals these days, whether coming from a facility management background or asset management background, or university graduates trying to enter this field, look at building ratings. They look at the National Australian Built Environment Rating System, NABERS, or Green Star, or LEED for our international audience, and acquire the knowledge and qualifications to commence those ratings. But when they deliver those ratings, whether they are specialist or generalist plays a significant role in that. If they are specialists, they are focused on the rating process itself and following the rules, and they might excel in one or two building services. that will enhance the knowledge of that rating. But if they were generalists, they might take this a step further. They might look at various aspects of building services to enhance their rating process. That's another way to look at it. Career advancement pathways. Now, when it comes to career advancement pathways, it is a misconception that you would need a formal degree to operate in the sustainability field. I can tell you that. That's actually quite misconception out there. A degree or any formal qualification or education will definitely help you and give you advantage in that, but it is not a mandatory requirement for you to operate in some of these positions or roles we've mentioned earlier. Now, I'll take it a step back and explain to you the benefits of tertiary qualification or degree. One critical benefit that tertiary education gives you is the ability to acquire knowledge. And don't get me wrong, the qualification you are applying for or studying to complete is different from the ability to acquire knowledge. Because many of us graduated from university and went into career, they realize what you've learned at university is only 20% of what your career demands. The other 80% is you learn on the job or acquire additional qualifications to support you. But the ability to learn is something that formal education equips you with, to research, to learn, to acquire knowledge, to look at your like-minded peers who are studying with you and how they acquire knowledge. So that's quite advantage in that field. However, these days with the modern education, online courses, on online communities like the ones you're enrolled in now, you can acquire the knowledge in different ways as well. There are a number of university and tertiary education listings that you can look at online and see how that might link to a role that you might consider and how much of that role that education will cover. Then you need to supplement the knowledge with additional training, certification, and so forth. Trainings are the courses and workshops that cover specific topics of sustainability, project management, advanced analytical skills that you will need to perform in your roles. Say, for example, you might have an IT degree, but you would like to branch out into sustainability data visualization and capture of this data. Therefore, you might want to take some visualization courses of Power BI as a platform and learn how you would do that. That's an example of courses and workshops, whether online, whether in person, something you would choose that matches what you're trying to get into. There are also the relevant certifications, which are the most important aspect really to operate in the sustainability field. And I'll give you some examples on those, because many of the teams I've coached and managed and mentored over the past years always come on day one and ask which certifications I need to tick in order for me to operate. Some of them you do need actually to have in order to operate, and some of them enhances your credibility to operate in this field. Say you're interested in energy management and energy auditing and energy efficiency. There is, for example, the Certified Energy Manager qualification, where you need to aspire to and learn what it takes for you to acquire that certification, whether the number of years of experience and whether the training towards that. And if you are operating in the building rating space, whether Green Star, LEED, or Neighbors, there's obviously the certification and training required for you to allow you to rate buildings. And that's quite an important aspect to consider. And lastly, the most important thing is having a community of like-minded peers. If you are part of a course or a degree or a tertiary education, you would have that. But many of us, once they discontinue that and move into the workforce, they crave that interaction. So some join professional organizations, some join communities of practice, and network, and all of them achieve the same purpose. And in what we're doing here within the Sustainability Academy is that we offer the community also for you to interact. So if you are part of this webinar or part of our master classes, feel free to jump into that community, comment and make a connection with other members and have a conversation and chats about what you've learned and what you're willing to learn. Some of this conversation can influence us actually in what we're doing. But the point I'm getting there is having a community of like-minded people is critical. In fact, the most critical for you to define and refine your sustainability pathways. I hope this brief webinar gave you an idea of some of the key roles and pathways when it comes to sustainability in built environment, and please leave us some feedback on what you would like us to expand on, or maybe we can dedicate another webinar to talk about a certain topic of that. But the intent was in this first webinar is to give you the introduction and enough food for thought for you to come back to us and tell us what you thought about this and what else would you like us to cover. Thank you again, and see you in our next week's webinar.